Hello, people. Before getting into the main subject of this video, I'd like to just reiterate something from the last one. Um, my my caution about dogma and dogmatic thinking doesn't mean that I think people can't have conviction and strong views. Um, I did mention that in the video, but I want to reiterate it because I think it's important. I think it's possible to have very strong views on things, very strong views, but not cross over into being antisocial, basically, to the point of disregarding democracy, disregarding the majority. But anyway, um, I've got to do something I don't do very often, which is talk a little bit about my leanings right now politically. And I'm talking party politically here. I'm not talking on more abstract ideological terms, just party politically. And this is very loose because we're still some time off a general election. I think even if an early election is called, it will be next year, not this year. Um, by the five-term Parliament agreement that was drawn up a few years ago, the fixed-term Parliament, we have to have an election on 2024 or earlier. Johnson, of course, has survived this vote of no confidence. By the way, by a narrow margin than Theresa May. So all those loyalists who are making it out to be a huge victory, they weren't saying that about Theresa May in 2019. Jacob Rees-Mogg is one of many hypocrites who was saying that she was a lame duck prime minister. Now he's talking about this being triumphant for Johnson. Um, I have to say this Partygate thing will be a deciding factor for me in my vote in the next general election. I'm tired of Johnson loyalists making out that it's a small thing, like it's trivial. Some people might think it's trivial, but I would ask them to reconsider that. And this is why it's not trivial. It's not just about a party. It's about the fact that the people who set the laws during COVID, laws which were the most restrictive we've had in modern times to basic freedom, they broke the laws that they set. The Sue Gray report clearly showed that. And it wasn't just a few drinks. The accounts seemed to suggest that the party was actually quite wild. Apparently, a fight broke out. Apparently, there was, people were partying to 3 in the morning. Um, so it wasn't just a couple of drinks. And our prime minister has lied about it time and time again. I think Johnson is not a trustworthy character, and I do question how much conviction he has as well. Politically, it's easy to see why he's got as far as he has. I mean, this is a guy who was sacked as a journalist. I mean, as a journalist or as someone who's trained in journalism, I've still to get started in my career. He done something you just don't do. You don't make up quotes, and you don't. Yeah, you just don't do that. Now, this was in his career early on. I believe it was when he was at the Spectator. Might be in the Daily Telegraph. I don't quite recall off the top of my head, but this is the man's history. Now, his supporters will say he delivered what he set out to do, which was, of course, the B word, Brexit. But what irritates me is the same people who are saying that, as they put it, Ramoners need to move on, are now cooking up conspiracy theories about the the vote of no confidence being a Ramoner plot, as they put it. This was a pretty pathetic headline by the Daily Mail. I get papers I don't even agree with because I need to see all perspectives. It's history, it's plurality, it's seeing different perspectives. Anyway, this is their headline. So hopefully that was long enough to read. As 148 Tory MPs hit the self-destruct button by opening door to smirking Starmer's coalition of chaos. And they're making it out to be a whole big Remainer plot. Those 148 Tory MPs, in my opinion, deserve credit because they put integrity above party politics. They understood the optics of this, and I think the only people who don't are those MPs who are still loyal to Boris, and which is most of the cabinet, and yeah, some supporters in the country as well. But polls have consistently shown that if Johnson, well, if he lost a vote of no confidence, should resign. He didn't lose, but this idea that it was a huge triumph just doesn't correspond with public opinion. From what I've seen, I've even seen Brexit voting Tories uh, be critical of Johnson on this. So for me, it's a major thing because I consider people who made very real sacrifices, people who couldn't go to their family funerals, for example. I think of ordinary people who face very stiff penalties. Now, at the time, I said, well, they knew the laws and they were breaking them, so I don't have a great deal of sympathy. Now I'm thinking, well, it seems excessively harsh given that those who set the laws broke them themselves. I remember one student who had a party, and he shouldn't have done it, but he had a party. He was fined £10,000, and I'm sure his income is a lot less than the Prime Minister's. So for me, it's this Tory entitlement, and I do think it exists with this party because it's time after time after time. It isn't just Partygate. It's the Dominic Cummings scandal. It's the Matt Hancock scandal. It's just one thing after another with this government, and I'm sick of it. The problem is the alternative is really not very inspiring. I mean, in Keir Starmer, to me, it's not the dullness. That is really not. I don't think dullness is necessarily a bad thing in a politician. I would not vote for a politician or whether he or she is dull or entertaining or what. I think it's rather shallow reason to vote for someone, in my opinion. Rather, I look at his positions. Now, I don't like a lot of Starmer's positions. I don't like the fact that he panders to the woke left of his party, the ridiculous taking the knee for Black Lives Matter, which has subsequently shown itself to be a very divisive, I would argue, racist movement. Um, the fact that he can't clearly say what a woman is ridiculous. And I don't think that's trivial. When journalists ask Starmer that, he sort of treats it like it's a gotcha thing, but it's not. It matters. It matters to women. It matters in terms of legislation. It matters for a lot of reasons. Um, and I also think that there's times that Starmer comes across too much like a cautious lawyer rather than a leader. I also think he is far too politically correct on issues like pan-Islamist extremism. I think of that occasion when the teacher was threatened in Batley near Leeds last year, actually. Now, to be fair, Johnson was silent as well, but neither Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson said a word about that. And I understand that as leaders, there's a lot of things going on at once. You can't possibly comment on every single issue. But that was an abhorrent situation. We had a British teacher basically living under police protection because of Islamist threats to his life. Well, let's use a more contemporary example, a more recent example. And I didn't make a video about this, maybe I should have. But the cinema chains being threatened by Islamists for showing that controversial film. No, controversial in their mind. Now, people have a right to peaceful protest. They do not have a right to make threats. And there have been threats made. Why is Starmer not condemning that? Why is Johnson not condemning that? I think generally politicians in this country remain, for the most part, way too hesitant when it comes to criticising Islamic extremism, with a few exceptions. I think too many mainstream politicians are just frankly scared to do it. And it's pathetic. Pathetic. I remember Aisha Bibi when the young woman in Pakistan, Christian woman who basically had to flee a mob, she could not get, and this goes back to the May years, but she could not get sanctuary in this country because the risks from Islamists in this country would be too real. That's a damn disgrace. Um, the Tories should be the natural party of national security and justice and so on. Certainly on the issue of crime and justice, I would expect the Tories to be the strongest, and they probably are. But that doesn't mean they're great. I think Dominic Raab's an okay Justice Secretary. I think there's been worse, in the sense that there have been Justice Secretaries who, in my opinion, have been more out of touch. I think Raab is okay. I don't think it's too bad. And I do give him credit for the victims bill that he recently introduced. I made a video about it. I think that's good policy. And I give Dominic Raab credit for that. But honestly, I think our justice system, it will take a lot more than one Justice Secretary to change it. It will take radical reforms. I think it's still massively out of touch. I think the Sentencing Council of England and Wales, I'd have it abolished and replaced with an elected council, or at least partly elected. I think it is out of touch. I don't have much respect for it. Um, as an example of our justice system and my contentions with it, um, any member of the public can write to the Attorney General to review a case if they feel it's unduly lenient. Um, but I recently followed up Wrexham Crown Court on a case there where a judge had given home invaders, one of them got 3 years for holding a knife to a woman's throat in her own house, threatening her baby. Anyway, that was just a typical example of a ridiculously lenient sentence. So anyway, when I contacted the court, they gave me this link to cases that were reviewed for undue leniency. The vast majority were not overturned. Some of them, sentence was reviewed and a tougher sentence was imposed, but the vast majority either did not apply under the current guidelines or just nothing changed, which says to me that public anger about this is simply being ignored, or the legal establishment sees no need to change. They think their sentencing is completely fine. So I would be looking at a party that is very, you know, basically very tough on crime. Starmer and Rayner have spoken tougher recently. They say that Labour will be the party of law and order. Mm, time will tell. I mean, under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, Labour did try to toughen its image a bit. They, of course, introduced ASBOs. But traditionally, it is the Tories you would expect to be tough on crime. It's not always the case. The Tories are very good at tough language, but in actual implementation, I mean, they've been in power for 12 years. Is this country's justice system more in touch than it was in 2010? I'm not sure that it is. At least not a great deal more. I honestly think the system needs a radical overhaul, not just little things here and there, as welcome as they may be. It needs a radical overhaul. So honestly, right now, I don't want to say I'm disillusioned because I think there will be politicians who do work hard and they're in it for the right reasons in every party. Um, if Labour was less woke, I would vote for them tomorrow. And if they could prove that they're tough on crime and tough on national defence. To be fair to Starmer, I think he's been quite good on foreign policy. I mean, he's been assertive. He's supported the government where he needs to. He's questioned the government where he needs to. The thing about opposition is a big part of it is holding the government to account. Um, and I think, Starmer has been relatively good in that regard. He's got the balance right. He hasn't just attacked the government for the sake of it, but he has held them to account. So I think he's got the balance right. I don't think he's a terrible leader. I think he's a lot better than his predecessor. And Starmer doesn't have the sort of toxic worldview that Comrade Corbyn did. I mean, his stance on Russia was abhorrent. I would argue borderline treacherous. I mean, the way he eulogized dictators like Castro was sickening. Um, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn could ever be trusted in number 10, and I'm pleased he never got there. What ideally I would like to see is a strong centre left or centre right party that is tough where it needs to be tough, passionate where it needs to be compassionate, and strong on the world stage. And that's quite idealistic, but that's what I would like to see. I want a party, a government that will be tough with Russia and China. I think we're still way too passive with China. We've got tougher with Russia. We're supporting Ukraine. We're making all the right moves. China, I think, it's not necessarily the government. It's that a lot of institutions in this country. I think a lot of our universities continue to pander to China, the Chinese regime, because they want money. I think that the government should threaten to withdraw funding from those universities if they don't clean up their act, i.e., seriously review their ties. To me, national security is one of the most important areas. That's not just about counterterrorism; it's also about being assertive with powerful, hostile adversaries, namely China and Russia. I mean, we can't trust Beijing or Moscow; we just can't. And this over reliance on China, I think we need to seriously step back a little bit. The Cameron Osborne years was way, way too subservient, just reliant on China. That may be something to do with the post recession world we felt we had to be. I don't know, but it was just, you can never trust a dictatorship, ultimately. So, yeah, I want to see a government that is tough where it needs to be tough, compassionate where it needs to be compassionate. Things about the Tories I don't like. I mean, particularly in the May years, this idea of again, it's something about Tory thinking I don't like, where everything comes down to money. So, for example, the immigration threshold for a couple. If you have one person who's British and their partner is a foreign national, they would have to earn a certain amount of money to come to the UK. Now, I understand the logic of this, that you don't want someone who's going to come in and rely on the welfare system. I get that. But what I don't get is why they put quite strict thresholds on that. Yet, the Tories have been taking money from Russian oligarchs for years, some of them tied to Putin. So the Tories are not squeaky clean when it comes to Russia, and they can't pontificate to Labour when it comes to Russia. The truth is, in a democracy, I'll just conclude with this. You're never going to be happy with everything. I don't expect to ever have a government, which I will totally agree with. I don't think that will ever happen. Um, but I do look at Labour and the Tories as the two big parties. The Lib Dems have always sort of showed a survival instinct, but these days they're pretty, I wouldn't say far left, but they're well on the left, and they're certainly woke left. So, they don't really have to worry about government anymore. The Greens are a joke, in my opinion. I have no respect for the Green Party, particularly as their leader supports criminal activity. Um, they can't even support this country staying together as one. The Greens, won't speak out against the concept of Scottish independence. They're a protest party. I don't take them seriously. Um, UKIP and the Brexit Party are basically a spent force because that's done. And the SNP, their cabinet minister said there won't be another Scottish independence referendum for a quarter of a century, and I agree with that because it was meant to be a once in a. I'm not just saying that because I'm against Scottish independence. It's about consistency. You can't say it's a once in a lifetime or a once in a generation referendum and then say, oh, well, we lost, let's have a rerun in a few years. It's ridiculous. I think generally referendums are toxic. I don't like them. I think Brexit and the Scottish referendum have shown that. Um, I'm going to round this up. I think an interesting thing is a lot of people find that their local MP, they often respect their local MP more than the party that they represent. Not always the case, but more often than not. And I think the reason is most MPs probably are they're in it for the right reasons. Good. I'm not one of these people that is so cynical of politics and politicians that I kind of lump them all together. I don't feel that way. I do think that I think with the current government there isn't a sense of entitlement. I do think there's a sense of one rule for us and another rule for everyone else. That will certainly be something that I consider when I vote in the next general election. They might think this is going to go away. They might think people will just forget this. I think people will remember that during the time when we had the biggest restrictions ever, basically, and at least in my lifetime, um, the people who set the laws broke them. There's just no way to gloss it over. And yes, Keir Starmer is being investigated over Beargate, but at least he said he would resign if he's fined for it. And so far that hasn't happened. He hasn't been fined for it. So at least he said he would resign. Of course, he would have to follow up on that if he's found to have breached the law. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Let me know your thoughts. Where do you stand right now? Do you know who you're going to vote for next time round? I do think people should vote. I think it's not only a civic right, it's a civic responsibility. Um, I wish it could be a bit more optimistic, but I mean, I'm sort of swaying towards Labour, but I'm definitely far from enthusiastic about certainly not the woke side of it and how Labour plays identity politics. For me, the deciding factor with Labour would be if they focus more on bread and butter issues rather than woke ideology, trans issues and fringe movements that basically the majority of people are not interested in. Point one. Point two, if they could prove that they're tough on crime, like seriously, that would be a deciding factor for me. National security, I trust Starmer more than Corbyn. Um, so those are the deciding factors. If Labour can show me that it will get a grip on those things, that it will get back to bread and butter issues rather than focusing on, basically far left ideology and woke ideology. If it can show that it's tough on crime, seriously, for example, propose some policies to that end. I mean, they've opposed a public order bill, which was specifically designed to tackle insulate Britain. So I would like Labour to publicly say they do not support the tactics of insulate Britain. I would like Starmer and Rayner to say we are against the tactics of insulate Britain. We condemn the tactics of insulate Britain. If they can't bring themselves to do that, then they can't be trusted on law and order. Anyway, time will tell. Leader of Her Majesty's Opposition and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom are two of the toughest jobs in politics. Um, that's why it's so important that when we vote, and I know we don't vote directly for leaders in this country, but realistically, the personality and the positions of a leader do matter. That's why it's important to consider all these things. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.